I'd been anticipating this home for an extended period, my mother making the declaration after Grandma's health crisis. To uncover her strategy, I started collecting information. The following day, I located a video. I didn't believe I would be the person to divide my relatives, but occasionally, the truth simply does that without any assistance. Grandma's 92nd birthday should have been a joyful occasion. Rather, it morphed into the night where years of deceit and control were revealed. I nearly skipped attending altogether. After years of dealing with the psychological torment from my mother, Barbara, family events transformed into tests of my self-control. Every smile was fake, and every chat had to be carefully handled to keep away from her schemes. Nevertheless, I couldn't skip Grandma Leonor's birthday. She had consistently been my support, even though Barbara worked to put distance between us. I got there late on purpose. It was much easier to blend into a crowded dinner than to have to navigate the unpleasant small talk that comes before a meal. My Aunt Carol was the first to see me. Her expression instantly brightened with sincere kindness. She patted the empty seat beside her. This was my lifesaver for the night. "Ethan, you made it." Carol's embrace felt like home, and she was the only person in my family who completely understood what Barbara was doing. My mom barely noticed I was there, offering a reserved smile before going back to her discussion with my uncle. That suited me just fine. Grandma Leonor extended her hand across the table to me. Though her fingers were thin as paper, her grasp was unexpectedly powerful. Her eyes still had that keen intelligence Barbara frequently tried to discount. "My heart," she murmured, "it's wonderful to see you." As usual, dinner unfolded with small talk, carefully placed chuckles, like a family choreographed by hidden disagreements. I was mentally marking the time until I could politely excuse myself when Barbara's voice broke the easy sounds. "I've been patient long enough, wouldn't you say?" she stated. "It's definitely time I obtained that house." She meant my grandmother's house, the gorgeous Victorian where she'd resided for 6 decades, the one property in our family with any actual worth. Barbara had coveted it for ages. "Mom still lives there," I said, my voice strained. "Or did you forget she's sitting right there?" Barbara's laughter sounded strained. "Don't be so over the top, Ethan. Mother understands she can't stay there much longer. We've talked about this." Grandma Leonor's expression presented a different reality. Her eyes narrowed, her lips compressed into a serious line. "We most assuredly have not," she said. Barbara made a dismissive hand gesture. "You're becoming forgetful again, Mother. Recall, the doctor mentioned your memory's not as strong as it once was." It was the usual Barbara strategy, emotional manipulation in front of everyone, and she knew most people would avoid confrontation. Not me, not anymore. "Grandma's memory is perfectly fine," I said. "Maybe asterisk you're the one mixed up about discussions that never transpired." I saw anger flare in Barbara's eyes for a moment before she regained control, her expression shifting into the injured mother act she had become so skilled at over time. "I've given up everything for this family, setting aside my own ambitions to look after my mother, and this is how I'm repaid, my own son accusing me of being dishonest." Aunt Carol cleared her throat. "Barbara, nobody is saying you did anything wrong, but maybe this isn't the proper time or location for this conversation." "Oh, I understand exactly what's going on here," Barbara interrupted her. "Ethan has always disliked me, always been unappreciative for everything I've done for him. The same old story, Barbara playing the victim, Barbara as the suffering one, and everyone else as ungrateful, selfish people. Not this evening. I wasn't going to let her wreck Grandma's birthday with her theatrics. What exactly have you ever done for me, Mom? Since I became an adult, I have taken care of myself financially, paid for my own education, purchased my own vehicle, and handled all my living expenses." Barbara's mouth opened and closed like a goldfish. Clearly, this wasn't part of her usual routine. "You've never had to experience real sacrifice," she finally stammered. "Money isn't everything. Something within me just broke. Years of stored-up anger burst past the boundaries of careful self-control. I got out my phone, opened my banking application, and pushed it across the tabletop toward her. "This is my financial situation, and I haven't ever sought any funds from you, nor will I, so please quit acting like I'm trying to get your cash or your grandmother's property." Her complexion turned a fiery crimson, and the rest of the relatives kept their gazes fixed on their food, feeling uneasy as we had this argument out in the open. Barbara then stated, her tone laced with fury, "If that's what you truly believe, then don't anticipate anything from me. No inheritance, nothing at all." I chuckled because I couldn't stop myself. The ridiculousness of being threatened with losing something I'd never wanted made me laugh. That's completely okay with me. Grandma reached for my hand once more, giving it a soft squeeze, and her eyes showed a combination of sorrow and satisfaction. I had finally accomplished what she never could. I stood up to Barbara without backing down. Shortly after that, the meal concluded with strained farewells and half-hearted commitments to see each other again soon. Those were the typical habits of a family that was falling apart, and I believed that was the conclusion of the situation, but I was mistaken. At 2:17 in the morning, Rachel called, and her voice was choked up with sobs. She told me, "Ethan, it's Grandma, she's down." My heart just stopped for a moment, then started thumping hard. I was already heading out to my car before the phone call even disconnected, still in my pajama pants and an old tee. When I got to the hospital, those bright, humming overhead lights were everywhere. I located my family in the waiting area, but Barbara wasn't with them. I asked, "Where's Mom?" As I quickly glanced around the room again, hoping I'd somehow overlooked her, Carol's face got tense and she said, "We've been trying to reach her, but she's not answering." That simple sentence sunk like a rock in my gut. Her own mother was possibly on her deathbed, and Barbara couldn't be bothered to answer her phone. A doctor came over, his face completely blank. He said, "The preliminary results indicate a stroke. We can't determine the severity until she wakes up, assuming she wakes up." Those last few words were implied, but no one said them aloud. Barbara eventually showed up at 6:43 a.m., and honestly, she seemed surprisingly well-groomed, considering she was supposed to have rushed to be with her mother. Her clothes weren't rumpled, her makeup was perfect, and not one hair was out of place. I couldn't help it. I blurted out, "Where have you been?" She lifted one eyebrow and said, "Ethan, I was sleeping. Some of us actually need to get some sleep." My voice was now tinged with frustration, and I said, "Mom had a stroke, and we've been trying to get in touch with you for hours." I let out a theatrical sigh. My phone was on mute. I got here as soon as I read the texts. The falsehood was so transparent, it was practically an insult. I was about to start in on her, but Carol's hand on my arm halted me. Not the right moment, not the right location. Barbara breezed right past me to chat with the physician, her voice abruptly filled with quivering worry. The show was back in play. "How is she, doctor? My poor mother, I've been so frightened." I turned away, feeling sick. Peering through the intensive care unit window, I saw my grandmother, frail, tiny, with tubes and wires linked to machines making those beeping and humming noises. A sudden, horrific idea hit me. What if Barbara had been anticipating this? What if that comment she made at dinner wasn't just her usual self-centeredness, but rather something far more sinister? The recollection of her words reverberated in my mind. "I've waited long enough." It seemed impossible, and still I observed Barbara's face as she looked at our grandmother through the glass. Not sadness, not dread, but something completely different, something that sent a chill down my spine. Over the following few days, Grandma's health improved somewhat, but she remained in a coma. I divided my time between the hospital and my job, resolved to be present when she awoke, assuming she woke up at all. Barbara's appearances were short and theatrical. She'd show up, put on a display of upset for the nursing staff, and then depart, insisting it was too hard to watch Mom in that state. In the gaps between Barbara's sporadic check-ins, Aunt Carol took me to one side, telling me in hushed tones that I needed to be aware of something concerning Grandma's will. I felt a knot form in my gut. What was it about? She modified it 6 months ago. I responded with a confused look. How did she change it? Carol looked around to make sure we were on our own. She left the house to me, with the grandkids sharing the rest equally, and Barbara was completely excluded. I felt completely blindsided. It was no surprise Barbara was so insistent on talking about the inheritance at that party. She probably already knew. I wondered if Barbara was already aware. Carol responded with a head shake, suggesting she didn't think so, not formally, but Barbara always seemed to have a knack for uncovering information. Why would Grandma cut her out? Carol's face clouded. She had learned that Barbara had been pilfering from her, little amounts at first and then larger, using her credit cards. Alina brought it up to her. However, Barbara refused all allegations, claiming Alina was disoriented, but my grandmother knew what was really happening. The whole situation began to make perfect sense. Barbara's newfound concern for Grandma's health, something she mentioned at dinner, and why she was nowhere to be found when Grandma became ill. We needed to secure the will, I declared, if Grandma were to pass away. Carol gave a confirming nod, stating the original was at her home, in the safe hidden behind the painting in her office. While the lawyer possesses a copy, if Barbara got a hold of the original document, she could challenge it, alleging Grandma wasn't mentally competent. That move was completely Barbara's style. I wouldn't be surprised if she'd been scheming this all along. 3 days after that, Rachel phoned me in a total state. Someone had broken into Grandma's place, and I met Carol at the house, and both of us ran as fast as we could up the path toward that gorgeous old Victorian home that had belonged to our family for so many years. The front door was open, drawers inside were pulled out and emptied, furniture was flipped over. It was like a very methodical search instead of a random robbery. We saw the painting lying on the study floor, and the safe behind it was open and completely cleaned out. Barbara beat us there, and Rachel asked what we should do, her voice barely a whisper, and I had no idea, not at that moment. But I knew we needed to keep a record of everything. "Take photos," I said to Rachel as I pulled out my cell phone, photographing every single room, every drawer, the damaged lock, the empty safe, the whole scene. Carol phoned the cops while I tried to find any evidence that Barbara might have left, and in her haste, she dropped a receipt near the back door. It was from a gas station just a couple of hours earlier, which proved she'd been there. The cops got there pretty fast, I'd say maybe 20 minutes tops, and the detective went around the house, jotting things down and asking us questions, like whether anything else was gone, and if we had any idea who might have done it. We told them what we thought about Barbara, but since we didn't have anything solid, they couldn't do much. "Family stuff is such a mess," the detective said with this kind of sad look. "Just write everything down so your lawyer can use it." Once the police left, we went all over the house, looking carefully, because Barbara might have taken the will, but maybe Grandma had left something else. And we actually found some bank records that showed weird withdrawals, plus credit card bills with charges that Grandma couldn't possibly have made, and also a little notebook where she had written down all her doubts about Barbara stealing things. Every little thing we found was like another weapon for this upcoming fight with Barbara. That night, the lawyer called and told us that Barbara had made a claim on the house, saying that Grandma wasn't in her right mind when she changed the will, and since the original document was gone, it was basically our word against hers. "She's not wasting any time," Grandma's lawyer said, explaining that he had a copy of the will but without the original, and since Grandma couldn't testify, we were in a tough spot. His voice kind of faded out at the end, and we both knew it meant that we were going to have a really hard time fighting against someone who'd learned to be a really good liar. I got our own lawyer, and from what I heard, she was known for taking on tough inheritance cases. She didn't shy away from the harsh realities of what we were facing. Barbara had constructed a powerful story, she told us at the start, saying she'd been informing folks for ages that Grandma was out of it. She even had friends lined up to testify that they saw Grandma losing track of simple facts or getting confused. "That's a complete fabrication," Carol said, her voice clenched with rage. My lawyer responded that she believed us, but we couldn't just rely on what we said. We'd need proof to combat what Barbara was saying. Over the following 3 weeks, we became amateur sleuths. I took some time away from my job so I could speak to anyone who had been in contact with Grandma regularly. The gardener who came every Thursday, the grocery delivery woman, her bridge club pals. Quite a few of them seemed hesitant to get involved, and some even admitted Barbara had already been in touch with them, expressing her worries about getting drawn into a nasty lawsuit. It turned out Barbara's influence was incredibly wide-reaching, the product of years of carefully maintaining the right image, the right relationships. The nurses who had attended to Grandma during her routine checkups became doubtful about her mental condition, out of the blue. Friends who'd often visit and hang out seemed unable to remember any of the specifics of their conversations. Even my own family doctor appeared unsure about confirming her mental sharpness, mentioning doctor-patient privacy. I was completely helpless, observing her deceitful plan take shape as my Grandma remained in a coma, incapable of stating the truth. Then, Rachel discovered the video. She'd been digging through old files on Grandma's computer, hoping to find anything that could support our position. What she uncovered was a video made just 3 weeks before the stroke. Grandma, looking thinner, sat in her living room with her attorney, talking about her will. Her voice was clear, her wishes unmistakable. "I want the house to go to Carol and my grandkids," she stated in the recording. "Not to Barbara. I made this decision with a clear mind and fully understood what I was doing." The lawyer's voice chimed in, "And you understand that this is a big change from your previous will?" "I do. My daughter has broken my trust again and again. I'll take care of her basic needs, but the house must be shielded from her." It was exactly what we needed. Evidence that Grandma was in her right mind when she made the changes. Confirmation of her wishes. The hearing date finally came. The courthouse stood before me, its stone face feeling overpowering in the early light. My stomach twisted with nerves as we walked up the stairs. Grandma was still in the hospital, recovering gradually but unable to give testimony. Her absence created a palpable emptiness in the courtroom, an empty seat where our most crucial witness should have been. We got there ahead of schedule because my attorney wanted a final check of our plans. Barbara's lawyer was a real pit bull and always wore a fancy suit. He had a reputation for being forceful and putting on a show, which was just like Barbara. "Keep this in mind," my lawyer quietly said when we sat down. "Barbara's going to try to put on a performance, so just ignore it and let her trip herself up." The courtroom slowly started to fill up. There were distant family members I hardly knew, people from the neighborhood who were gossiping about everything, and a handful of Barbara's friends positioned where the judge could see them giving supportive gestures. Barbara made a late entrance, clearly aiming for impact. She wore a plain black dress, and her hair was in a simple bun, acting like a grieving, loving daughter. Her eyes were artfully red, not overly so as to appear dramatic, but enough to suggest she'd recently been crying. She had no idea about the video. The hearing commenced with opening remarks. Her lawyer described a really sad story about a daughter who was devoted to her sick mother, and then was unfairly excluded from the inheritance because her mother's mental health was getting worse. I had to bite the insides of my hands to avoid yelling out her lies. I felt my attorney's hand squeeze my arm, reminding me to keep my cool. As Barbara began her time on the witness stand, I was truly witnessing a lesson in manipulation, a lifetime spent refining the craft of misleading others, all compacted into a mere 45 minutes of brilliant acting. She delicately touched her eyes with a tissue while describing how she discovered her mother in a state of confusion and disorientation. Her voice cracked as she talked about a loved one calling her by the incorrect name. Tears began to flow when she talked about the cruel manipulation that had alienated her mother. The accusing look she gave Carol and me was planned down to the last detail. According to Barbara, her mother was already exhibiting signs of confusion when she started making these changes, her voice faltering again. She would fail to remember things we discussed, mix up the pills she was taking. There was one time she left the stove on throughout the entire night. It was incredibly difficult to watch her getting worse, but I put forth all of my efforts to provide her with help. When my lawyer had the chance to question her, she walked towards the stand at a leisurely pace. There were no exaggerated movements, no loud tones of voice, just a quiet sense of control. "You've created an incredibly clear picture of your mother's deteriorating mental health," my lawyer started. "Very concerning," Barbara agreed, managing a perfect mix of sadness and firmness. "When did you first start to see these troubling symptoms?" Barbara answered without any pause. "Around a year ago." She claimed it started with minor things, forgetting where she put her spectacles, becoming uncertain about the current date. My attorney gave a sympathetic nod. "Did you seek medical help for these issues you were seeing?" A flicker of doubt appeared on Barbara's face. "I tried to get her to go, but she wouldn't. She wouldn't admit anything was wrong." "I understand, so there are no official medical records concerning this mental deterioration." "No, not officially, but anyone who spent time with her could see the problem." My lawyer reviewed her written notes. Including her regular doctor who examined her monthly, Barbara squirmed in her chair. He didn't observe her as I did at her house when she was having trouble. My lawyer nodded once more, then suddenly changed the line of questioning. "When was the last time you went to your mother's house before her stroke?" Barbara looked surprised, thrown off by the change in subject. "I went often, at least once a week." "So would you have been there on the 15th of last month?" "I think so, yes." "And during that visit, how would you characterize your mother's mental state?" Barbara saw the trap that was laid for her a beat too late. She was mixed up that day, especially bad. My lawyer walked toward the judge's bench. "Your Honor, I'd like to show Exhibit C," and the bailiff got the video equipment ready. Barbara's eyes darted all around the room like a trapped animal. Her attorney leaned forward, finally aware of the potential problem. "What is this?" her lawyer demanded. "Evidence," my lawyer stated plainly. The screen lit up with the video. The date was clearly displayed, the 15th of the previous month, when Barbara claimed to have come to my home and found me disoriented. My voice echoed clearly and confidently throughout the courtroom. "I want Carol and my grandkids to inherit the house, not Barbara. I've arrived at this decision with a completely sound mind and a thorough comprehension of what I'm doing." The lawyer asked from behind the camera, "And do you understand that this is a major alteration from your previous will?" "Yes, I do. My daughter has broken my trust time and time again. She's taken money from my bank accounts without my consent, used my credit cards without permission, and wasn't truthful with me about her financial troubles. I've given her opportunities to make things right, but she persists in stealing from me." Elena looked directly into the lens, her gaze filled with sharpness and determination. "I am mentally competent. I have a complete understanding of what's happening. Barbara will get a monthly allowance to cover her basic expenses, but the house must be protected from her. She'd quickly sell it to pay off her debts, and my family would lose our legacy." The courtroom was completely quiet. Everyone was staring at Barbara, whose face had lost all its color. The carefully constructed image she presented was collapsing right before our eyes. That's not," she stuttered, looking flustered. She was confused. She was told to say these things. You just stated that you were there on that date and found her confused, and yet here she is, displaying a remarkable degree of lucidity. Why does this make no sense? Barbara hoped her attorney could help, but Palmer was stunned and speechless because of the damaging proof. "Are you willing to change what you said?" My lawyer asked me. "Maybe admit that you weren't there that day or that your mother wasn't actually mixed up." Barbara completely lost control. "You have no clue what I've been through," she yelled, her act disappearing and replaced by real anger. "I should get that house. Because of all my hard work and the things I'd put up with, she planned to leave everything to me. It was supposed to be mine, but they turned her against me." Soon after that, the judge delivered the verdict. The will would remain valid as it was written. The house would go to Carol and the grandkids, as Elena had wanted. Additionally, they would look into the financial problems that Elena had spoken of in the video. However, even though I won, it wasn't a happy feeling. The trial definitely revealed Barbara's true character and also her debts, her stealing from her own mother, and all of her lies. Even so, watching her fall apart in that courtroom didn't make me happy at all. All I felt was deep sorrow for what could have happened, and for the mother I never really had. Afterwards, Barbara tried her usual tricks, like crying, accusing us of betrayal, and saying we had turned Elena against her. But nobody bought it this time. Even the people who had previously allowed her actions could no longer ignore the clear proof of her actual character. This split the family in new ways, with those who were fed up with Barbara's tricks and the few who still attempted to justify her actions. I made sure I aligned myself with the first group. There would be no more mandatory family meals, no more tiptoeing around her, and absolutely no more faking it. Grandma Elena finally woke up from her coma. While she healed gradually, her mental faculties remained intact. She went to live with Carol in the home that had nearly been taken from her. Barbara only received a small amount of money each month, as the will stated. This wasn't enough to keep up her usual habits. It was certainly insufficient to pay off the considerable debt she owed. She lost more than just finances. She lost the influence she had wielded over the family for so many years, her power to dictate what happened and to manipulate how people felt. That, more than losing the inheritance, was what truly devastated her, the loss of control. Some lessons come at an extremely high cost, but they're still incredibly important. The truth always surfaces eventually, and then you have a decision. You can run from it and hold on to lies that make things easier, or you can confront it, accept it, and start to get better. I opted to heal, to create something genuine from the ruins of what was gone, and in the end, that's the most significant win of all.